Hello, friends and family. Welcome to Sasquatch Sisters Northwest YouTube channel. My name is Angelique, and I will be your host around the campfire. Tonight's segment is the second episode in a three-part series we're doing on the Spirit Lake area of North Idaho. As you recall, during the last episode, we talked to Tony, and he told us about how he and his family had heard the terrifying sounds late one night coming off the ridge tops that surround Spirit Lake, and how they seemed to be communicating back and forth to each other. And then the sounds eventually ended up down at the beach behind his wife and daughter while they were anchored offshore in their houseboat. Well, then a little bit later, he took us to an area between Bayview and Carywood where he had found a couple of large human-looking footprints near and at the base of a snapped-off tree while working in the woods. Well, tonight, we're going to continue our Hoodoo Valley encounters by going back down to Spirit Lake. And we're going to be talking to a young woman by the name of Melissa, who also had an experience down by the shore. Now, after we hear about her encounter, then we're going to go back and we're going to talk to Tony's daughter Autumn and her best friend Trinity, because their encounter is very recent. So grab yourself a roasting stick, a nice cup of hot chocolate or cider, and a comfy spot around the fire, because that chilly fall air is definitely settling in, and it's a perfect time for a true story. In the last episode, we talked about the history of Spirit Lake in the panhandle of North Idaho, and we talked about the lumber mill that used to be down at the north end of the lake where the swimming hole and the boat marina now sit. Well, let me get you a little bit more information about that area and set the scene for you. Up until just a few years ago, it was a lot less developed on that end of the lake than it is now. And there wasn't any restrooms or small pavilions, and the swimming hole was more commonly used as a stop-off for the lake's many waterfowl to rest and leave their feathers all over the beach. The local residents referred to it as either the fireside or the mill pond. But now it's been manicured and decorated, and there is beautiful little pavilions and barbecues, and it's used as a family beach setting for many summer get-togethers. It's a quiet little inlet off the main body of water that tucks back under a bridge and away from the noise and the bustle of the bigger boats and the skiers. And even though the beach is occupied most of the time, that end of the mill pond is mostly used for those who just prefer the quiet setting away from the main body of water. If there is anyone in the water at that end of the mill pond, they'll either be fishing off of small boats or kayaking. And that was what Melissa and her family were doing one afternoon in mid-August of 2020. She and her family were fishing off of kayaks in the back end of the mill pond. While her husband and daughter were fishing against the far bank, Melissa chose instead to skirt the far edge of the shore against the wilderness side of the lake and do a little bit of exploring. Now, let me explain something here. This isn't an area that no one swims in because it has no beach and is covered in cattails and the beginnings of milfoil and lily pads. It's also privately owned, and there is no trespassing allowed on the shore whatsoever. Well, Melissa drifted slowly over to an area where there was a tree that had fallen in the water, and she noticed there were fresh tracks leading right directly into the water, around the tree and back out again. Well, most of the time in the Pacific Northwest, whenever there are tracks leading into the water, it's usually caused by a moose or a bear, but in this case, they were definitely not. Clearly, she could tell they were human-shaped prints, but were very large in size, spaced quite a ways away from each other, and in an area where the water would be too deep for someone to walk out in. It was also in a swampy area where the underwater silt and the lily pads were too thick and dangerous for anyone to risk getting their legs caught in and drowning. Along with the first set of tracks that she spotted coming out of the woods, she also began to realize there were 3 different sizes of footprints, as if it was a family that had strolled into the water together and back out again. Now, mind you, this is in an area that is closely monitored by surveillance cameras owned by the new landowner of the hillside, and he does not allow anyone to even beach their kayaks on that side of the lake without chasing them out or getting permission first. Now, Melissa floated slowly around the tracks and noticed that they came out of the water and went up the embankment into an area of the woods that was extremely dense and forested. All of the tracks were human-shaped, but in varying sizes, and definitely in an area that no one in their right mind would go barefooted. And yet these tracks not only came from that area, but they also went right back into that area as well, after what appeared to be a refreshing wade out into the water. Melissa said that as she was taking photos of the tracks, she began to smell a horrible stench coming from out of the forest that she described as a dirty, dirty dog smell that almost made her gag. She also began to have the undeniable feeling that she was being watched from the same area in which she saw the tracks leading into. She admitted that it made her feel very uneasy as there was no one else in the water that day except for her and her family. This was during the time of the year when most of the people that lived around the lake had already left to go back to wherever they came from, and the tourists had gone home. Now, I have, with her permission, included those photos at the end of this video. So I'd like for you to take a moment at the end to look at them and notice one very important aspect about them. These forest people are known for one very interesting variation from us in their stride. Aside from the fact that their prints are usually extremely large and spaced much farther apart than our legs can go, these beings tend to walk in a perfectly straight line, as if walking a tightrope or a balance beam. If you look at these photos, you'll see for yourself that these tracks do just that. You can also see the area in which they came out of the bushes and led back into them. This is not a place where anyone would ever swim. Now, not only is it interesting that Melissa found these tracks at the shoreline of Spirit Lake, but take a moment to consider last episode's encounter with Tony. These tracks were found less than 200 yards from where Tony and Colleen had their houseboat moored that night. Now, let's go back and take a moment to follow Tony's daughter and her best friend out into the woods for what turned out to be just a quick stop-off along the banks near the lake. Just a few months ago in midsummer, Tony's daughter Autumn purchased a baby tortoise, and she and her best friend Trinity were in the process of setting up the vivarium for it. Now, Autumn remembered that there was some soft green moss in an area where there's a seasonal runoff that comes off the hillside and down into the lake. Now, it isn't near anyone's house, and it's quite a ways down the lake from where Tony and Melissa had their experiences. This is a place that's more out in the wilderness than it is around cabins or any swimming area. Autumn and Trinity brought with them a small basket in which to set the pieces of the moss that they planned to harvest, and they parked along the side of the road, and they walked up just a few yards off of the road up into the woods where the runoff is. Trinity had no more than set the basket down beside her on the ground when a large cracking noise on the hillside beside them and across the creek startled both of the young women, and they glanced up just as two small sticks flew across the dried creek at them sideways. Now, Autumn told me we just got there and were getting ready to get some moss, and that was when we heard this really loud crack, and then we heard this whirring noise and saw these two sticks come flying in our direction. Well, at that point in time, we knew we were being chased out by a Sasquatch. So I said out loud, "We aren't there to hurt you or cause you any problems. We're just going to take some moss and then we'll leave." Well, the two women quickly gathered some moss and left as fast as they could, and nothing happened after that. Now, before I go any farther, I want to tell you that Trinity is my daughter-in-law. So she immediately called me when she got home and told me how she felt about what happened. I asked her if she thought they were being chased out of the woods because they were taking something from the forest that didn't belong to them, and maybe these beings were being offended. Well, this was her response, and she said, "No, I never got the impression that they were mad at us for taking the moss, but I did get a feeling that they thought we were going to leave garbage there, because there was a lot of garbage. I mean, a lot. And it looked like people were dumping stuff there for a long time. I got more of an impression that they thought I was going to leave the basket there, like they thought the basket was garbage, because as soon as I set it down on the ground, that's when I heard the branch break off the tree." So I asked her, in all fairness, if she thought it could have possibly been a squirrel that knocked a branch loose, or maybe something like that. And she told me, no way. It sounded like someone was breaking a branch in half over their knee before it came flying out of the woods at us. And it wasn't just dropped either. It was like it came at us and then hit a tree or something in front of us, so it ricocheted off of other trees. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure they would have hit us. Well, I asked her if she would take me back up there so we could do an investigation, and she agreed. And that, my friends, is where I'm going to end tonight's episode, because the next one is when she and my son took me back to that place to see it for myself. Now, before I end this, I want to take a minute and I want to thank Tony, Melissa, Autumn, and Trinity for having shared with us their experiences outside of Spirit Lake. It takes a lot of guts to do that. Now, I know that we're quickly reaching a day and age when more and more people are coming forward with their experiences, and that's a good thing. But for so long, you couldn't tell anyone when things like this happened to you. You'd get immediately ridiculed. Well, thanks to people like Scott Carpenter, Steve Isdall, and David Politis, the truth is now being brought to light, and thousands of people such as Tony, Melissa, Autumn, and Trinity are finally being given a voice. And I just want to say that I am so proud of you for coming forward, and I want you to know that it does take a lot of backbone to do this, and we are honored that you chose us to share your encounters with. I also want to give special props to Autumn for having the wherewithal and the wisdom to stop what she was doing and address these forest people out loud with her peaceful intentions. That is extremely important, because whenever you have an encounter with these beings, you are literally walking into a stranger's home unannounced. From what our research team has discovered, whenever you give them the respect that is due them, the same as you would anyone else, they will 9 times out of 10 give you at least enough respect in return to allow you to leave their vicinity unharmed. Now, that doesn't always pertain to the situation, don't get me wrong, because you don't know what kind of a clan or tribe you've encountered. Some of them are warring individuals and very dangerous, but the majority of the time, they are just people. So good job, Autumn. We're proud of you for doing that. Now, with that being said, you don't want to miss what we found when we went back up there. And yes, we gave our peaceful intentions ahead of time, and we had some very remarkable things happen. So hit that notification bell so you'll be the first to know when we have the next episode in the series. And don't forget, if you've had a true encounter with the forest people in the inland Northwest and would like to share it with our listeners, contact us at sasquatchsistersnorthwest@gmail.com or on our Facebook page at Sasquatch Sisters Northwest. This is a safe place to share your encounter. Thank you for joining us around the campfire tonight. Grab another hot chocolate because it is a chilly evening, and toss another log on the fire.